Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 2, Episode 12. I'm Michael LeBlanc. On this episode of the podcast, we're mixing up the format a bit. Our episode showcases highlights from Steve's virtual event celebrating the release of the second edition of Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. I serve as MC, and we're joined by special guests Seth Godin, Sucha Rita Kadali, Carl Boutte, Ollie Banks, and Michelle Grand. So let's give it a listen. So listen, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today from wherever you are around the world. We're here to celebrate and support the launch of our good friend Steve Dennis's release of the second edition of his best-selling Remarkable Retail, available for order in North America today, Europe shortly, and around the world as well shortly. We'll talk a bit more about that a bit later in the show. So we've got an action-packed hour plus for you, with special guests joining us to celebrate together and share their insights as well from the UK, Canada, US, give us a fulsome view of their part of the globe through the Remarkable Retail lens. We'll also have some time towards the end to answer questions or ask Steve some questions, so get comfortable. Let's jump right in. Steve, let me ask you a few questions. Let's talk about the book for a bit. So what's the premise? Who's it for? You know, what makes it different? There's lots of books on the shelf. As a retailer, you know, you've got to fight for shelf space, whether it's in the mind or online. Right. So take us through the book and what you thought you were going to kind of dent the universe with, so to speak, by writing.
That's a tall order. Well, you know, it's very much a strategy book in that it covers kind of a wide view. And really, I talk about business design. What I was really trying to do that I think is different than some books is to try to make it as both provocative and pragmatic at the same time. The fundamental premise, we'll have Seth Godin on in a little bit, but I was very struck by Seth's work on Purple Cow back in 2003, 2004 about this idea that brands, organizations needed to be fundamentally remarkable. Some of you are probably familiar with that. By that, he meant both very unique, but also literally that people would talk about your brand, that it would stand out, that it would really make a big impression on them, and they would tell their friends. And I started to think about that in the retail context a bunch of years ago. And really the fundamental premise in the retail context is that in a world of abundant choice, access to products anytime, anywhere, anyway, all this information, all this connection, that we're no longer in a world of scarcity, which defined retail for a long period of time. We're in a world of abundance. And the challenge is how to stand out amidst all the noise, all the choices we have to be really, truly remarkable. And so one of the things I say in the book is that even very good is not good enough anymore. So the premise was to talk about how we got to where we are, what are the most important things going on today, why we have to choose remarkable. That's really part one. And then part two is this 8 essentials of remarkable retail framework that I've developed over the years, which lays out a framework and some of the steps to take to bring that vision to life.
It's one of the defining characteristics I find of the book. It is it's both, as you say, written at a strategic level, but also a practical level. In other words, there's some tools, these 8 essentials. Now, getting into the 8 essentials, you've described 6 of them as kind of table stakes. Do them well and you can achieve parity. The final 2 really could differentiate you. And as you say, make sure that customers remark upon you, which I love about this framework. Talk about a little bit about that for.
Yeah. So, the first 6, I think, will probably be, generally familiar to people as key strategies. The last 2, number 7 is memorable and number 8 is radical. What I sometimes say is memorable is the one that kind of really hits at the heart of what remarkable is about. It's creating that experience that's intensely customer relevant, truly unique, resonates strongly with the customer, is very true to your brand. But there has to be an element or 2 that are really sort of wow worthy, that secret sauce or X factor that are really going to cause people to develop loyalty to your brand and talk about it. So I say number 7 is often the thing that's really critical to creating that remarkable strategy. You've got to do the other things just to kind of stay in the game. And then the last one, radical, is this idea fundamentally of building a culture of experimentation, a habit of innovation. So I think you need to have that to not only sometimes get to be remarkable if you're behind, but it's the key to staying that way, because I'm sure everybody who's listening knows that you can have a really great idea that's good for a while, but competitions will be on your heels and you got to keep innovating and stay ahead.
Yeah, right on. That goal line always moving, right? That goal line's always moving forward. You released the first edition a year ago, pretty much a year ago.
A year ago.
I asked you in another forum, we were on Clubhouse yesterday. I said, "What's changed? What's different?" And Trevor Sumner made me laugh. He goes, "Did you actually just ask that question?" So I guess
it was in the context of my book, rather, but hopefully everybody's pretty aware what's changed in the world. Unless you do kind of Kindle direct publishing, writing a book, you've got to really be done with the core of the writing about 6 months before. There's a little bit of opportunity to change some things in the final editing, but I basically was done before Thanksgiving, with COVID not on my radar screen at all. And then obviously COVID happened. And so it's pretty unusual to write a revised edition so close to the first one. But I felt that, COVID was so game changing, I guess, for lack of a better term, that number one, I wanted to really start the book from that reset that we've all lived through. Number two, there are some particular things coming out of COVID that weren't anticipated in the first book. But the fundamental advice in the book is really similar. I just kind of updated the timetable, dealt with some of the fallout from COVID, and talk about a few particular things. The one other thing I'll say about it is when I was thinking about the audience, and really the audience is a pretty broad one. I think anybody in retail, whether you're a retailer, vendor, service provider, investor, can get value out of the book. But kind of the center of that bullseye was really those brands that needed to mount a significant transformation to thrive, and in some cases merely survive. Generally, I thought that there might be 2, 3, 4 years for some of these brands to mount the transformation. And then unfortunately, in a lot of cases, the COVID really collapsed those timelines. So unfortunately, we've seen obviously a lot of retailers file for bankruptcy, close stores, and some are kind of just breathing fumes at this point.
For some, and whether it's the category, no fault of their own, or the circumstances, certainly, we've talked about on our Remarkable Retail podcast that we have together, why it takes a crisis sometimes to create change. Goodness knows this is a pretty epic crisis. Not that anyone would have willed it, but I get now why. And we'll pull on those threads throughout the hour. But for now, let me welcome Sucharita Kadali to our show. Sucharita and I have known each other for years, and I know you've known her as well. Vice President, Principal Analyst with Forrester, an analyst who's, in my a clear-eyed take on retail. If you don't follow Sucharita on Twitter, you're missing out, because it adds so much to the richness and dialogue of any development. Sucharita, you've always got something really interesting to say. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, Michael, and thank you, Steve, for letting me be part of this awesome project. I'm excited to have been asked to write the forward. So thank you.
Well, let's talk about the forward for a little bit. Thanks you for again, thanks, as Steve was about to thank you for writing, taking the time and writing the forward. But let's talk about it. When you read the book and you've got the perspective of your broad range, both data, you've got analytical data, you've got all kinds of information at your fingertips. What perspectives did you take when you thought about how you would approach writing a forward for a book like this?
Yeah, well, what was interesting, of course, about this was we had the pandemic, and was taking the pandemic into account, but also recognizing that everything about Remarkable Retail, these are principles and concepts that extend beyond the pandemic. I mean, they have to extend beyond the pandemic. I mean, certainly they were, kind of, it's important to ask the questions about how does the pandemic impact the framework, but, the framework still needs to last long beyond that. What it took me to was, well, what else has been happening in retail, and how is that relevant to the challenges that the retail industry is facing, and the way that companies need to be thinking about surviving and thriving in such competitive times.
Well, speaking of that, what's your assessment about, we look like we're on the road to retail recovery. I mean, the miracle of the vaccine has come, thank goodness. I can't imagine a context without even having the vaccine at our disposal. Talk about the retail recovery from a strategic perspective. I mean, do you think retail and the retail industry may regress to the mean, or even consumers may regress to the mean? And by that, I mean, just resume the behaviors pre-COVID from the before time? Or do you think there's some real changes structurally that you might think of that are going to happen as a result of these, what it's going to be 18 months, almost 2 years of the COVID era in North America?
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly some things that will be absolutely different. And I would argue on the retail side, it seems that retailers have discovered their inner agility, right? I mean, it's like for the first time they discovered that they can actually, get things deployed in a few weeks, and it actually stands up and, doesn't fall down. So that was, I think, a huge learning for them, because they've been so inhibited by departments of no. I think that what they've also discovered is that that there are a lot of orthodoxies that they need to let go of, and kind of one of the things that I talked about in that forward is even in the 90s, the general consensus was that retail's over. It's Walmart's won, right, and there's nowhere else to go. And then in the next decade after that, or decade and a half after that, it's been the Amazon story that Amazon's won. Right. There's nowhere else to go, and we need to you just need to buckle up and kind of capitulate and get on the Amazon platform and join them because you can't beat them. Right. And I think that what the pandemic very interestingly exposed is that even if you're on the Amazon platform, they can kick you off, or kind of you're at their mercy, because if they decide they're only going to sell essential goods and you're not essential, there's nothing that you are going to be able to do about that other than to own your own destiny. And I think that is that's really, some of the insight and where we shake out is the sense of empowerment and, kind of leveraging these principles of uniqueness and specialness and thinking through, what is the unique role that you play and how can you connect with consumers in achieving those goals. So I think that the companies that will have made it through the pandemic, I think, are going to be stronger than ever. They are going to be more confident than they've been. I mean, if they can survive this, they can survive a lot. Right. So I think that's one of the silver linings, I think, that's come out of this time.
As I think about the COVID era, and something you said got me thinking, because, during the COVID era, I think two interesting things happened. One is I think consumers had a bit more forgiveness for, if not mistakes, as you said, people would stood up things like curbside very quickly. It wasn't a flawless process. And there's a bit more forgiveness, I think, for consumers. And then on the second part, from an employee perspective, there was a mission. We're going to get together. We're going to get through this. As a company, everyone had a unified mission. We need to survive, right? Or there's an opportunity. Are you worried when you think about what's new and next about retail, that as those two things fade, thankfully the mission, but also perhaps the forgiveness that how do you see that? How do you see that turning out as in the years to come, post-COVID, post-vaccine?
I think that retail, what will happen in the industry next is, kind of the further embracing of innovation. And, what that means is recognizing, that maybe new business models are in order, or there are new ways to think about monetization. I mean, one of the things that has really, really grown in the last several years, and especially during the pandemic, the essential retailers were the first ones to embrace it. And I think it will go even further to vertically integrated retailers, specialty retailers, is this idea of retailer media networks, which were essentially alternative monetization, right? It's advertising on retailer sites. And it's at this interesting confluence of consumers shopping online, kind of us potentially heading toward a cookieless world, traditional advertising and traditional digital being challenged, and retailers recognizing that they are at the bottom of the funnel. So all of these things together put them in a really, really interesting position to take some of that advertising pie. And that can potentially offset, some of the competitive challenges they may have with, access to inventory or pricing or, all the free shipping that they have to offer. As part and parcel of that, I see new partnerships, new, we always talk about strange bedfellows in politics or in media. There's no reason that we couldn't, and I'm curious, Michael, you probably have a perspective of being Canadian. The Canadians have some of the best coalition loyalty programs in the world, right? So,
yep.
But that's something that other than in airlines, in markets like the U.S., we haven't embraced as much. And, do we see that potentially as a change for the future? And then the other big area of change that I see in retail that I think is going to, be for the benefit of a lot of really special brands is this push toward social responsibility, this push towards sustainability. It's becoming incredibly important to customers, and it's more important, even more than customers, I would argue, it's becoming important to investors. And there are, organizations where, the SEC is talking about putting standards in place for ESG reporting. And that will have all kinds of downstream impacts on ultimately, what brands sell and how they choose to message that, their products. And that gives consumers a much better way to assess and, make their decisions.
Well, such an interesting time in retail. It's almost, if you're a golfer, it's like a mulligan, right? You get a do-over for about 18 months, but I think that time is coming to an end. Sucharita, thanks so much for bringing your insight and for lending your wisdom to the forward and bringing your insight here today. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Steve, back to you. I want to pick up on a couple of threads of what Sucharita was talking about. Sure. And as we think about what you wrote new and how you thought new about the COVID era, you've been talking about 6 new forces of the COVID era. What are they, and why should we, what should we think about them? Why are they important?
Yeah, so there's several places where I have greatly expanded content, I guess, and this is one of them. So the 6 new forces, I'll just touch on quickly. I'd like to maybe spend a tiny bit more time on one. So the first is something I've been talking about a lot and usually get made fun of for saying bifurcation every opportunity that I can.
Angel gets its wings, and angel gets its wings every time you say it.
I call it bifurcation 2.0. So this is really the phenomenon that I go into in quite a lot of depth about the so-called collapse of the boring or unremarkable middle. So where we've seen success on the value, convenience sort of side, whether that's Walmart, Amazon, Costco, dollar stores, et cetera, and then success on the higher end with specialty stores like Sephora or more high-end stores. It's really been this middle ground that has been shrinking for quite some time. But I think the forces of COVID have really, basically given them no place to hide. Frankly, I think it's a lot of the federal stimulus, at least in the U.S., that's kept keeping some of these pretty much walking dead retailers. So that's the first one. Second one, we'll have Carl here join us in a bit, but I call the accelerating acceleration because Carl coined the term great acceleration, and I didn't want to have to pay him a licensing fee. But it's really the acceleration of certainly e-commerce and all things digital. That's been going on, as I'm sure everybody knows, for a while, but that was taken to a whole new level. But a lot of nascent technologies, contactless payment, appointment shopping, live streaming of personal shopping, those sorts of things all got greatly accelerated, and that's having a pretty big impact. The third is reallocation of spending and kind of redefinition of essential. So there's certain things in the COVID times I'm sure we can all relate to that became more essential to us than perhaps in the before times, as you like to call them. But, this incredible, and I hope in this next little section, we can talk a little bit more about what we think is going to persist. But, you have this explosion in grocery at the expense of restaurants, anything kind of work from home related, work out at home, and then apparel, accessories, anything kind of related to travel really hit hard. So that's a pretty big force. The fourth is power consolidation. So certainly we've seen as obviously retailers go out of business, as they close a lot of stores, that market share has to go somewhere. So it's migrating to the stronger players, but we're also seeing stronger players acquire weaker players, often at fire sale prices, or acquire their brands. And, seen several retailers that had physical presence become online only brands now. and that kind of thing. The fifth is The Great Rewiring, which I borrowed from Rashad Tabakawala, who talks about how this, well, as you said, will be almost 18 months in this crazy world, has fundamentally changed the way consumers do things, the way we think about work and home and entertainment and the like. The last one, which I'll just spend a tiny bit more time on, and trying to watch our time and keep this fast paced. But the sixth is one that not only do I talk about in this part of the book, but I get into a little bit more in some other parts, is what I'm calling the hybridization of retail, which, is not a new thing from the standpoint of physical and digital blurring and the shopping experience becoming more hybrid, whether you want to call that omni-channel or harmonized. What I think has really moved to the forefront by virtue of COVID, it's going on a little bit beforehand, is making it more obvious the hybrid nature of stores. This idea that stores for the longest time were, for the most part, places for consumers to go see stuff, pick it up and take it home with them. And it was about maximizing selling square footage, maximizing sales productivity of the transactions run up in the store. Again, we've seen this progression, but I think it's become much more obvious the role of stores as advertising, the role of stores as pickup points, whether that's curbside or buy online, pickup in store, return in store, e-commerce fulfillment, maybe a role of service. And then we're just starting to see, and I think this is something to really pay attention to, what I would call the hybrid deployment of stores. So rather than having one format that is pretty much blown out everywhere, maybe you have a city version or a country version, thinking about stores where you have maybe a flagship store and a satellite store, kind of what Nordstrom is doing with their full-line stores and then their Nordstrom local concept, or Whole Foods taking some of their stores and making them dark stores, fulfillment-only stores. So I think we're just seeing the beginning of this, but I think a lot of investment, a lot of rethinking operations is going to have to go into how stores on an individual basis operate, whether they're new or relocated or just remodeled, as well as real estate deployment. So I'll stop there in the interest of time, but that's definitely something I've been exploring and I think is pretty interesting to watch.
Yeah, and in the interest of time and as a teaser, right? Get the book. You'll hear the rest of it.
That's right. But there's
it's the
more.
Book launch. There's more. Let me jump off. It's a good jumping off point. Carl Boutet has, you mentioned him already. He's talked about and coined that term, the Great Acceleration. Carl is with us today, great friend from Montreal. Carl is a retail strategist. We're going to have him back a little bit later to talk about the situation in Canada, give us a kind of part of the global update. Carl, are you there with us?
Hey, Carl.
Congratulations, buddy. I'm happy. I hope we do this every year now, because this is a blast.
We are absolutely not doing this every year.
Carl, we're going to get, as I said, we're going to get back, bring you back on as part of our global tour of what's happening. But talk a little bit about this idea of the acceleration. I mean, I guess the principle is, now seems very straightforward that there are things already happening that were just moved forward in terms of, pick a number, years, months, who knows what. Well, but just touch on that for a little bit for us.
So first, I got to recognize that it was here exactly a year ago. So it feels like Groundhog Year that the term when Scott joined us and we were talking about the word acceleration kept on coming up already. And the idea of the great acceleration, there's been a lot of greats since then. There are probably more great than the acceleration itself. I think the acceleration is sort of what is the underbelly of all the other dispersions and bifurcations and all these other things that are happening on top of it.
A random name generator for retail.
Yeah, we're loving it. So I own the great acceleration. But what we've come to realize is sort of two main things that are happening. So one is it was like a wake up call. You guys were just talking about that for executives to speed up their investment processes around technology adoption and use the crisis as sort of that jolt that they needed. But I think more importantly for them is the Great Acceleration was like a portal. That's more and more how I'm seeing it, because it really was like sort of an opening and a closing. This time last year, we were all a little freaked out. And I think we were sort of seeing the future, what was going to happen. We were, the reason why it's an acceleration was all things that we were predicting to happen 10 plus years from now. We sort of glimpsed and saw that. We saw what 35-45% e-commerce adoption could look like in certain categories, and whoop, they close back up as shops reopen, and depending where you are in the world, if they're reopen right now or not. So it was really it was startling, and every conversation I would have afterwards, including our friends at Canada Post, that were telling me that they were hitting parcel volumes that they were predicting for 2029, around that time. So there was a lot of data points that were sort of backing up the acceleration. Now, did we go in that line, and are we maintaining it? Not at all. We did that. We dropped back off. The portal closed back, but it showed us a lot of things. It showed us a lot of weaknesses. And now, we have to now we're catching up, and we're trying to make sure that, God forbid, we have to go through these much more, that we're not going to be caught flat-footed as much as we were the first time.
Well, it's an anniversary in many ways, and let me jump now from that. Thank you for just kind of giving us that overview. I think you will get, as I said, we'll get you back talking about the Canadian situation. But right now, we're going to do a bit of a global recovery outlook tour, and again through the lens of a remarkable retail lens. Why don't we start with Michelle? Michelle Grant is a seasoned retail analyst who helps global organizations build the future of their businesses at Salesforce. Blends data and analysis to create thought-provoking content. Michelle, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Welcome. Thanks for having me. It's such an honor. Congratulations, Steve, on your second book.
Michelle, the U.S., looking outside in, the U.S. consumer, to me, looks like a Timex watch. Takes a licking and keeps on ticking. I mean, the retail environment.
Yeah, that's an old school reference.
Whether it's the stimulus, certainly there's some stimulus checks, whether it was January or now, but really a resilient consumer base. But what's your outlook, and how, give us some sense of the U.S. retail, the state of retail in the U.S. and how you see it evolving over the next 8 months?
Yeah, definitely. We are surprisingly optimistic for 2021 when it comes to retail. The industry as a whole, I should speak. We actually commissioned a survey of American consumers last month in March, and we asked them what they were going to spend their disposable income on over the next 3 months. And shopping was the number one category. 40% of Americans said that they were going to spend their money on shopping, just slightly behind savings. So there's enough to go around to spread the money across a lot of different both product categories, but also services and savings. So yes, like you said, the American consumer took a licking last year, but things are looking better this year. Although all retailers have a unique situation, and everyone has to deal with their COVID comp in a different way. So we're a bit more bearish, I should say, on grocery, right? Consumers are not stockpiling products anymore. Restaurants are reopening and people are going out and dining. So we don't think that the grocers are going to experience the growth that they saw last year. They might even see some declines, but still be elevated compared to 2019. We're not going back all the way to the behaviors that we saw in that year. And then on the other hand, we're very bullish about e-commerce across all categories. But again, are we going to see sort of the near 100 triple-digit growth rates that some of the retailers experienced? No. But we are going to see that these digital habits we adopted last year are sticking to a degree. So we're going to see sort of a spike, I think, in the first half of the year due to the stimulus, due to hesitancy around going back to the store still, but probably normalize in the second half as people do get vaccinated and return to the store. And then two other trends that we're keeping an eye on that Steve alluded to as well is these products that are essential now for your going out lifestyle, right? So apparel and footwear is going to have a resurgence as we go from comfort to style. And then another trend is the housing market is very strong. People are buying new places, and that's likely to drive demand for home goods. And so if you're a retailer that pivoted your merchandising to embrace the home, you'll do well, in addition to the specialist retailers that had a pretty strong year last year.
So it could all end up to be a pretty remarkable recovery. Do you buy into this? I've heard it a couple of times, the roaring 20s are back like 100 years later for a whole bunch of different reasons. I mean, there's pent up, there's savings, there's pent up demand. It'd be a big shift, no doubt, into services. I know I'd love to be at a restaurant, and I think there'd be a shift from services, as you said, food service, but a shift from stuff, but also a shift. Do you see that recovery as strong and sustained for this year, maybe through next year, 2022?
Yes, I agree. And at first I thought, I guess in the previous years, retail was competing against experiences for wallet share. And we do expect that travel, dining out will see a big boom, especially in the summer when it's, I'm in Chicago and it's really nice to be outside and on the patios. But because of the high savings rate, because employment is in a much better place than it was last year, because of the stimulus, there may not be a competition between the services and products in the short term. Both types of spending could be winning because people have a lot more money to spend in general.
Right on. Well, Michelle, thanks so much for joining us and lending us your insight. So valuable as we kind of traverse the globe. So thank you for telling us about the U.S. consumer. Now, I wanted to introduce and welcome Oliver Banks. So Oliver is a retail transformation consultant based in the UK, helping retailers to deliver transformation programs, and a fellow podcaster. He hosts the Retail Transformation Show podcast. Oliver, welcome.
Well, first up, congratulations, Steve. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
And are you going to expect to come every year? Because you were here a year ago as well. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'll check my diary.
Well, listen, thanks for joining us. It's a little later at night. You're in the UK, London. Give us a sense. I'm going to burden you with both just London and the entire EU responsibility. You've give us a sense of the state of retail. I mean, at the beginning, in the before time, a little bit, I suspect that the trends were not dissimilar, but you tell me. And then I really wanted to hear from you, particularly in the UK. You had a double whammy, right? You had both Brexit and you had COVID. It's the imperfect or perfect storm. So give us a sense of how things have evolved and are shaping up in the UK.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you're right on the money, Michael. We were sort of certainly pre-COVID. Rewind 15 months now. Similar place, similar trends, and then obviously we've played quite similarly over the past few months. Where we're at now in the UK is we're actually at quite an optimistic point. So just yesterday in England, we had all of the non-essential stores reopen. So this is all your sort of non-grocery stores and so on. And so that's a really optimistic point. Some of those stores have been closed now for months and months. So it's a really big point. And of course, there's lots of questions that we just don't know the answer to yet in terms of how much of the habits that we've formed over the past year, how much have they become locked in place? And will we return to that? What does work from home mean in terms of where we're based and how we live and how we shop and also how we socialize as well, of course. So I think all of those things are coming through. We've, of course, had some retailers that were in challenging situations pre-pandemic face up against the wall, and that's unfortunately an inevitability that we've again seen around the world. Actually, when you hop across the channel, Europe's in a slightly different place than the UK. So the vaccine position is not quite so strong as we are in the UK. So some of the approvals and supplies have been a bit hiccupy, and different countries are working through it at different paces. And of course, they're still just going into lockdown. So France has recently gone into, for example, another lockdown. I think it was last week. So just as the UK is coming out, just literally next door neighbours are going straight back in. So it continues to be that yo-yoing struggle that we've seen over the past year.
And of course, so important. And just to put some numbers to it, I just looked up today, the percentage, 15.6% of Europeans have at least one jab, as you might say, compared to North America at about 24%. And the North American numbers brought down by Canada. Canada slightly ahead of where the EU is. So it is a bit of and of course, big trading partners, right? So I'm sure that has very material impacts on movement of goods through over to the UK, and also as trading partners, right? Very important for your retailers.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on Brexit very quickly. I mean, that has been a struggle and continues to be a struggle as, companies of all sizes, of all industries, find a way of working and importing and exporting and what the rules are. So I think that's put a bit of a limiter on. But for me, I think fast forward a few months, the whole Brexit thing will just be a bit of a hiccup. It will be a hassle, but it will just be forgotten about. And I think there'll continue to be more collaboration going on, which is only a positive thing, and will continue down the trends that we've already seen around sort of data, around digitalization, around many of the key themes that Steve so clearly lays out in the book.
And many of the transformations that you help and guide from your clients. So, listen, thanks for bringing us up to speed. I gave you a big mandate from it's a lot of countries and a lot of ground to cover. But thanks so much for joining us and giving us that overview.
It's a real honor. I'll see you next year.
All right, Carl Boutet, come on back and let's talk about Canada. You're in Montreal. I'm in Toronto. I often say that the Canadian retail has vastly more similarities than differences from the U.S. retail. But give us a sense. Target. Yeah, unless your target, like I just said, vastly, but not entirely. Carl, give us a sense of what's happening in Canada.
So I was just saying, more about this than all of us put together. So, I mean, as far as Canada goes, I think we're very much parallel with Michelle, what Michelle was saying, and except for the fact that our vaccine rollout, obviously, to what Ollie's point, we're more closer, or what you brought up, we're closer to the European dynamic. Just quickly, maybe beyond Canada, let me go even further for 2 minutes. Let's look at, how India, sort of emerging markets are getting propelled and spending a lot more time focusing on those, because I think this pandemic is going to do what SARS did to China and created Alibaba. I think we're going to see that in markets that we still don't understand the concept of informal markets. We think that the rest of the world is formal like we are. So it's going to be really fascinating to watch these markets formalize really, really quickly. And what I mean by formalize is simply the idea of you just having to payment process becomes more formal, where there's a lot less cash going around. So I was speaking at a group in Nepal a couple of months ago. They had the two largest e-commerce players there. They went from 3% transactional payment to 92 in like 4.5 months.
92. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, because there was, contactless payment and all. So this is going to, these sort of places, and these are, Nepal is maybe not the largest country, but India is still 80% informal economy. I mean, think about these all these places that have had to formalize, quote unquote, really, really quickly. It's going to be amazing. So,
well, listen, thank you. You've brought it in, and Carl, you almost better get home, because where you are, there's an 8 p.m. curfew. Just to let everyone know what the state is where in Quebec, and I'm on a stay-at-home order here in Ontario. Things are things are pretty dire from a retail perspective.
Michael, it's felt like a stay in your basement order for the past 14 months here, so it's not that different. Yeah. All right, Thanks a lot. Congratulations again, Steve. Thanks for having me. See you next year.
Thanks, Carl. And now it's time for honorary Canadian Seth Godin.
Seth, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. I feel like, there's a saying about rock and roll that, all of rock and roll comes from a few chords from Chuck Berry. It feels like, you take ideas and you release them into the universe and watch them grow and evolve. And certainly Purple Cow was one of those. I mean, it was transformational for me. So it must be welcome, and it must be something to see your friend release into the universe ideas that had a germ of an idea that you started, and really that provided a foundation for.
I learned at least as much from Steve as Steve has learned from me, and watching.
That's demonstrably not true. So come on.
Well, I think if we went back into a time machine to 1979 and did the compound interest of who was teaching who multiplied by 45 years of nurturing, I think it's going to even out. It's like buying Bitcoin at $3.
Well, that's very nice to say.
Here's the deal. Retailers don't read This Is Worth Reading. It's the number one best retail book of all time. But I think that what I would love to chat about is chapter 19, which could be an expression, right? How are you dealing with chapter 19? Better than chapter 11. Here's a Seth Godinism for you, which is revolutions destroy the perfect and then they enable the impossible. And there are all of these things around us happening now. And I hope everyone is reasonably healthy and finding peace of mind. But surrounding us for the last 10 years that were demonstrably impossible. Billionaires coined because they traded some digits online. The idea that I could go online on Tuesday at 4:00 and order some fancy solder and it would be delivered to my house Wednesday morning for free. I mean, we can go down this endless list of impossible things. The fact that we are having this conversation without getting on an airplane or taking a horse and buggy is impossible. And all of these impossible things occur by destroying things that were perfect. And the two things that were most perfect economically were advertising and retail. And advertising got destroyed 10 years ago, and now retail is getting destroyed and being replaced by something that is impossible, which is no longer is average the standard, that the standard is weird, that normal is for distributions, that what we have instead are humans who are speaking up about what they want and how they want it, and they're getting it. And there's still opportunity too widely, unfairly distributed. There's still too many people who are left out of the benefit of the doubt bargain. But at the same time, this shift, it's not going back. Just like we're not going back to CBS Evening News. It's not going to happen. And so it's fun to talk about when are things going to go back to normal and then people are going to flow back into malls and do the Gruen transfer and the rest of it. But this is clearly a 5-year compression of the future. And the future is about abundance, not scarcity, not scarce shelf space, not scarce ad space, not scarce merchant choice. It's about an abundance of all those things, which means that the power is going to shift and the respect stack is going to shift. That's my rant, and I'm sticking with it.
Yeah, Can I ask you one question, though, Seth?
You can ask me as many questions as you want. You're paying for this Zoom call.
That's right. So chapter 19 is about essential number 8, which is being a radical. And I feel really good about the chapter. A little inside baseball here. When I wrote the first draft of the book, there were 3 parts, not 2. And there were about 4 or 5 other chapters. And they basically were trying to get at expanding on this idea of radical. How do you change culture and all that kind of stuff? And my publisher, who I believe is listening, hi Maggie, very wisely said, no, cut that we're landing the plane and then you sort of start it up again. And maybe that would be a good other book, et cetera. And so she was absolutely right. And I think it's a better book for that. But I always felt a little bit like I didn't say enough about how to change, how to get unstuck. A lot of the things that you talk, I see the practice, I think in the background, you talk about in the practice, but have talked about in all your work. Any just in, 95 seconds or something, advice on how to make change happen, how to get unstuck, how to ship work.
So the subtext of the question when it's asked by people who aren't as brave as you is, how do I make change happen and not fail? How do I make change happen and not give up my power? How do I make change happen and be sure that I will sleep well at night because I am attached to an outcome? And the answer is you can't. And so no one wished for this pandemic. It has been, the cataclysm of our lifetime. But it's here. Okay, that happened. Now what? And what that means is change isn't up to you. Change is coming. Will you choose to be resilient? Will you respond? Or will you react? And what it means to be resilient is not, how do I ride this out so I can get back to normal? It's, how can I say goodbye to normal and accept the fact that this is going to cost me something? And the less attached I become to an outcome I have imagined, the easier it's going to be for me to be the cause of change, not the victim of change. And I can tell you, it cost me, how much, $40 billion to be wrong about this? In 1992, I was the dominant creator of online games. I had Prodigy, AOL, CompuServe as my clients. I had Microsoft waiting in the wings to work with us. As long as online services worked, I was going to be fine. And the World Wide Web showed up. And I looked the World Wide Web in the eye and I said, doesn't make any sense. It's not going to work. It's like Prodigy, but it's slower and there's no business model. Go away. And I willed it to go away. And I believe that if I left it alone, it would wither without me. And that's why Yahoo was started by David and Jerry, not David, Jerry, and Seth. Because while they were busy building Yahoo, I was building a book called Best of the Net. And the thing is, the world's going to change with or without you. And they learned this at Sears, and they learned this at Neiman Marcus, and they learned this at Crotté and Burrell, and they're going to learn it everywhere else. It's going to change with or without you. So you might as well enjoy the ride.
Thank you.
Well, it's fantastic advice. And Seth, you've done 19 of these, I think, if my count is right. So such a tribute and such a testament to your insight. So I think I see it reflected as I talk to Steve, but such a treat to have you join us and chat with us and just connect the dots and help us frame up the book. And listen, just it's great to see you, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. And one last tip. One of the reasons I write books is because a book is a really cool package. It has Proustian value, and it doesn't run out of batteries. And one of the ways that I've figured out how to spread the ideas is I encourage people to buy 6. You buy 6 because if you can get 5 people to read the book with you, you can have a conversation that's impossible to have if they haven't read the book. Yeah. So I am the hype man for Steve Dennis today. Buy 5 more copies.
All right. Remarkable Retail Book Club coming soon.
Fantastic advice. Thanks again for joining us, Seth.
Take care.
It's a great jumping off point, Steve. Where and how can people get the book? Talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get to questions. We've got questions coming in. So give us a little bit of the 411 on the essentials, so to speak.
Well, just very quickly. So the book was released today in most major markets. I think the UK is a couple weeks from now. There are a few other worldwide markets, but you can get the hardcover or ebook version just about anywhere. If you want to support demand, you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo. If you want to support independent bookstores, I'd send you to bookshop.org, or a lot of your local bookstores can help you get it. And the Audible version will be out soon. I can't quote a date because we are going through the review process. So it could be tomorrow, it could be a week, but there will be an audiobook version. So
yeah, I mean, any number of different ways. And I know I was experienced with you as you read through the book. It's a whole different experience to read a book, but thank you for doing it in your own voice, because I find those you're just more authentic. So, I do. And I encourage everybody, then hire.
Every hour I was working on it, I thought, no, why didn't I not hire a professional?
This is the best spend of my time. Yeah. All right, let's get to a couple of questions. Scott has asked a question of us all, really. And his observation was during the COVID era, the big retailers started to pull their teams together in an integrated whole. So, they pulled merchandising, marketing, supply chain together. I mean, we talked with Sucharita about the mission and coming together. Do you see that unification continuing post-COVID, or do you see kind of the Saks thing where they take advantage and actually go the opposite direction? They kind of completely even carve off the whole Saks.com.
So I do think there's been an acceleration of that. I mean, I will say, and I talk about this a lot in the book, I don't understand why it's taken retailers so long to eliminate the silos and see the customer as the channel and try to create one holistic, omni-channel, harmonized, whatever you want to call it, experience. I mean, that was stuff, I was working on. I know plenty of other colleagues, plenty of other companies have been working in that direction for 10 plus years. So I just think that the obviousness of the growth in e-commerce, but also the interplay between channels just hit people in the face. And all the change that they should have done in many cases several years ago, they were just basically forced to deal with it. One thing I think is really interesting is companies like Target, Best Buy, Tractor Supply, Lululemon, companies that were already breaking down those silos years earlier, they really were able to pounce on this much more quickly. You saw a bunch of other brands, including some very big ones that shall go nameless, that basically cobbled together some stuff and it worked okay. And I think, Michael, you said earlier, maybe there was a little bit of grace extended to some of these brands because of the crisis. But, as we start to move back to a little bit more the new normal, the new weird, there's not going to be as much tolerance, I think, for that. So I do think it was accelerated, but I think actually it's boards and management teams should really ask themselves what took them so long, because it's been, to me, really obvious for a long, long time.
Question around the responsibility of boards, and maybe even not the competence of boards, but their ability to move organizations or help move organizations forward. I mean, if you looked at the average board of directors today, they're probably staffed or with people with a lot of experience, perhaps a lot of tenure, maybe not so oriented to the new, whatever is the new. Do you think there needs to be a revolution in at the board level that will need to make many retailers move and take advantage of the opportunities?
Well, absolutely. At the risk of getting some flack, I mean, most big company boards are a bunch of old white men, and being an older white man, I'm not against old white men, but you just don't see a reflection of most companies' customer base. There isn't good gender equity and diversity around, but also, aside from people of color, gender differences, you don't see a lot of, not necessarily younger people. I mean, could be younger people, but people with diverse experience.
Right. Diversity of views, right? Diversity.
I've had some dealings with several corporate boards, Fortune 500 size company boards, as an executive and as a consultant. And it was shocking to me, the lack of understanding that some board members had about what was going on in the company. And some of that is the way boards operate. They may have 6 meetings a year or whatever. And these are very busy, high prestige people for the most part. So They don't have the time. But in a lot of cases, they haven't had the experience. One thing I talk about in the book, which I think is related to this, is, and we talked about this on the podcast, we had Brendan Witcher, Sucharita's colleague at Forrester, on. And I was at a conference a couple of years ago where he said to the audience, even if you've got 20 or 30 years experience in retail, only the last 3 years count. And his point was making is that you've got to unlearn so much of what made you successful. And I think as you look at the sort of folks that are on a lot of boards, they've had great success, perhaps in a different industry, but they came up through the ranks in the 90s in a different world.
Different time.
I think boards in general, I'm making a very sweeping generalization, are problematic in many cases, and we need to see a lot more diversity and new ideas, and I don't know, maybe even different ways of governing, because there's just been too many failures in many respects on boards.
The next question actually picks up on the thread you were talking about. What years of experience matter anymore? I mean, the data is so different that what we've experienced in the past 8 months isn't relevant. You and I have talked about this a couple of times, that, what we've seen the past 18 months is almost, how do you learn from it? The behaviors were so odd. Carl can't go out after 8:00. I can't go to a store. Stores are closed. Stores are open. Stores are closed. Can we really learn? The question for you and anyone else on the panel would like to kind of chime in, any of our guests, what can retailers really learn from the past 18 months of watching consumer behavior? Well,
first thing I'd say about it is that, you're never going to be able to plan for every eventuality. And hopefully this pandemic is such an extreme situation that the takeaway won't be, we've got to just build up a cash reserve and take no risk because there might be a horrible pandemic a year from now. I don't
stock up on toilet paper. Yeah. Fill the warehouse in toilet paper.
No, the warehouse full of toilet paper in every home. But I think the lesson for sure is you've got to be more agile. I mean, people have been saying that for a long time, but building agility in your business model is incredibly important. The volatility, the uncertainty and complexity we've seen in retail for years is just getting more and more so, irrespective of whether we have some sort of black swan event. So I think agility is the main thing. The other thing, which is such a cliche, I hate to say it, is really, really understand your customer. If you really, really understood your customer 5 years ago, you would have broken down those silos. You would have invested. You would already have curbside pickup. There are companies that have curbside pickup because they were close to the customer and they were willing to experiment before they were forced to. So I think those are some of the keys. I wonder if Ali wanted to jump in. I hate to put him on the spot, but as a transformation guy, I wonder if he's got anything else he wants to weigh in on.
Well, I think you made an excellent point about agility. I mean, for me, what we've seen over the last year, we've all heard the stories of, years and years worth of change in days, weeks, or months, whatever. I think what that has done is it's shown us all that we can do it, right? So for me, the lesson is that it's not even so much about agility. In my view, it's about just getting on and doing stuff, because we all put in these reasons, this sort of blockade or administration and bureaucracy and nervousness over, frankly, making a decision. But we have shown we can do it, and we can adjust and evolve it along the time, which is absolutely in line with that sort of agility principle.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's absolutely the key learning. We've got to get on and we've got to do stuff.
The other thing I'd add to that is, which is a slightly different idea, but one of the things I talk about in the book is that we really misunderstand risk a lot of times. I have a section called "The Opposite is Risky." I also talk about, there's kind of cultural barriers, the defenders of the status quo, what Sucharita referred to as the Department of No. And, not taking risk is actually the riskiest thing. So that's why I'm worried that if what we get out of this is, oh my God, we just got to be ready for every possible eventuality, that will actually make us more risk averse. And that just is sort of the frog boiling slowly to death in water, the drip method of irrelevance or whatever you want to call it.
Listen, we're on 6:15. We've had a fast-paced, hour and 15 minutes. It just flew by. I hope everyone enjoyed. I wanted to thank Michelle, Ollie, Carl, and Sucharita for joining us. Of course, Seth as well. Thank you so much for joining us. And Steve, thank you for being my partner on the Remarkable Retail podcast. I learned so much from you. I've kind of been like watching the evolution of the book and listening to the evolution of your thinking. So it's kind of a privilege for me to kind of go alongside. So thanks for inviting me for hosting today. Last words back to you.
Well, I just want to, I know time and attention are precious assets. So I know there's lots of competition for your time. So I just want to thank everybody for joining, and for the panelists and guests for coming in. And I hope to see many of you in person at some point in the not too distant future. So thanks for your support. Thanks for everybody. My ideas get better through questions and connecting on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and all those things. So hope everybody stays safe and be careful out there. Have a good night.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thanks again. Be safe and see you on the other side.